Okay, invasive herbaceous plants. Canada thistle, I mentioned this earlier. This is a true, in terms of state law, a noxious weed. It grows by rhizomes, underground stems that pop up new plants here and there. It can go a long ways. I know farmers forever hated this plant because it was so difficult in their pastures for their animals. And you get this in your garden, you'll have to work a little bit to get rid of it. Remember my parents' garden as a kid, we had Canada thistle a couple times, and we called them pickers when we were kids. Didn't want to work with the pickers. And it produces a seed that eventually flies around. It's in the same family as dandelion. So it can be a real problem if you have a lot of it. It just can cover large areas. And very hard to pull because you can't get all those. It's like pulling quackgrass. Dame's rocket, another one that people will say, well, but that's so pretty. And it is a pretty color. We've dealt with this at the clearing for my whole time here, and longer than that from what I've heard. We don't have a lot of it, but it must be pretty long-lived seed in the seed bank in the soil because we keep getting it. It's a biennial, mostly. Sometimes it can be a weak perennial. So you get that first year, this bunch of leaves at the base. That's easy to miss that first year. Then you see it the next year when it grows up, it's flowering and fruiting stalk, taller. It looks a lot like the wild phlox. This has 4 petals, and phlox has 5. There is a native woodland phlox too, that very nice plant. So again, first year rosette and then second year flowering plant. Mostly lavender colored, but some white, can be white too, and in between. One nice thing about it, it pulls easily. Even a big plant with a cluster of foliage that big pulls really easily. But again, when you pull that big cluster of leaves, you leave behind a little garden, a little cultivated garden for other stuff to come up. And I wonder if that's why we're getting more, and we just can't get rid of it because we're always bringing up old seed that's viable still in the soil and then grows up and we get that next year. So we pull 30 or 40 or 50 of these every year at the clearing down around campus. Every year, like clockwork, we pull these and they come back. New ones come back. It's in the mustard family. Everlasting pea, this is another, like Dame's rocket, another plant that was brought in as an ornamental originally and escaped into the wild. Everlasting pea, obviously a legume with a classic pea-like flower, produces these pods later in the season, has wings on the stems. It grows up, you usually see it growing up through shrubs where it kind of flops over to the front end. It's real limber. It can crawl up as high as 6-7 feet, which means that it's growing in something. If you want to spray it, you're spraying the shrub too. So what we do at the clearing, we kind of pull it out of what it's growing in and lay it on the ground and then spray it on the ground there to get rid of it. Another one that, as we didn't start working on this until about 6-7 years ago. We have 2 places where we have it here. And when some of our guests in the summer would see us either pulling this or, why are you cutting down that beautiful plant? Then you tell them why. Because it is really a beautiful flower. And I see this quite a bit up here. Forget-me-nots. We have, I'm sure, 1 million of these at the clearing. Mostly this color. I'd say 1 in 100 or so was white. Real low, weak perennial. An individual plant will live 3, 4, 5 years maybe. Doesn't get much taller than about, 6 inches maybe, somewhere in that neighborhood. Was originally grown as an ornamental and escaped. And this is the one that, this is mostly down on the west side of our property where our campus is. where our guests stay for week-long classes, and we get a lot of people kind of challenging us on this one. Why are you pulling that? Well, we're not pulling all of them because it's, we have acres of it. This has a pretty long bloom season. They're in bloom for, some plants will bloom as early as mid-May, and some will bloom as late as mid-July, mid-June. So not all at once, fortunately. So we can come in over the course of several weeks and just pull those that are in flower that day. We don't pull the little ones that grew from seed last year because that would be impossible. You can't even grab them hardly. So we just do the flowering plants, and we're making progress. I've been keeping the invasive species coordinator down in Sturgeon Bay, Carrie, apprised of our progress on this, and at some point, if we find out that they're all gone in that area, we might write it up as a little paper or something. But this is got to be the most numerous invasive species in Door County. There are just hundreds of millions of them probably up here. Garlic mustard, we don't have that here, except for those two that I found over almost 19 years. But it's up here, and I know a couple guys who deal with invasives as part of their business, and they've told me horror stories. I did deal with this before I moved up here. I lived at a little nature sanctuary near Kenosha for 7 years, my wife and I, and we had it there, and I pulled tens of thousands of these over several years. Endless. It does pull easily. It's a biennial, so a little cluster or rosette of foliage the first year overwinters, and then you get the taller flowering and fruiting structures the second year. It's another mustard, four kind of cross-shaped petals. Edible. In fact, I think it was brought here. I think it was one of the first plants brought to America, maybe. It was brought as a food and herbal plant, I think. Food plant for sure. And I don't know when it finally came to Wisconsin. I know I was pulling it in the mid-'80s in Kenosha County. It can be overwhelming. Often by the time you notice you have like at Newport. I think it was established for I don't know how many years before somebody said, by that one campsite, you've got garlic mustard here. I think they've had it since. So, and this is one that you want to look for the outliers. You get this big patch of 1,000 plants, but you have one over there and two over there. Go get those first. You don't want to have another one of those big patches starting over there. So this is a nasty creature. It often grows almost to the exclusion of anything else. So this is one you might be able to broadcast spray. Take a backpack sprayer or a sprayer and spray an area. It's just solid sometimes. And chances are there's seed down there that's going to grow back. It could be a long process to get rid of garlic mustard entirely in an area. Phragmites or reedgrass or giant reedgrass. This is a person standing in it. So it can get 10, 12, 15 feet tall even. This was brought, I think, as an ornamental grass. I don't know when, years ago. It's like quackgrass on steroids. It produces these long stolons, in this case. And at each node, a new plant can grow. And these can be 30, 40 feet long. And they're as thick as your finger. Loves the wet soil that's disturbed very often along Lake Michigan shoreline, that sandy soil. And
stuff that's all over Green Bay, the city of Green Bay,
yeah.
all over the road.
That where the Fox River dumps into Lake Michigan, that was one of the richest wetland areas in the Midwest until this took over. And now it's like a desert of this stuff down there. They've done a lot of spraying with helicopters. I get up on the beach at Newport a couple times a year, and it was pretty solid in places up there. And then one year I went back, and it was almost all gone. They had sprayed it. And when they're spraying it, they're probably spraying some other stuff too. But yeah, again, you got to pick your battles, right? I'm not sure if they're using. I think they're using an aquatic version of glyphosate, rodeo maybe. They also bundle it. They'll take they'll go in, or two people will go in, and one person will gather up a whole bunch of it, and they'll tie it to contain it, and then they'll spray those bundles. Yeah, so this ecologically is as bad as we have up here, but the DNR has sprayed many of those areas along the lake in the last, I don't know, maybe 5 years or so. So this is a nasty one. Here's a newer one that I didn't know we had here until maybe 12, 15 years ago. Helleborine orchid. You don't think of an orchid, how can that be an invasive? But this one is escaped ornamental. Don't know where it came from. I think it's oriental originally. And it has, you can see it's an orchid-like flower, orchid-like leaf. At first glance, you think it's a lady slipper. But then you notice it's a little different. And then if you see it in flower, you know it's different. And this flowers later in the season. And it's tempting to go pull it. It doesn't pull, it just breaks off. It's a perennial, and then it'll just resprout the next year. So you have to do your best to convince yourself not to pull it. Hounds Tongue, this is in the borage family. This is one that we're seeing more and more up here. Real hairy, fuzzy leaves. It's a biennial. First year growth down on the ground. Second year grows up, sometimes up to about 3 feet tall. Produces these very ornamental flowers, and then produces these fruits that are like Velcro. They attach onto animals and people, and you move it around that way. So, and there was something else about this plant that I can't remember why it was bad. Well, it's gone. Anyway, Hounds Tongue. Japanese knotweed, this is one of the smart weeds. When I was early in my career, some people called this hardy bamboo. It looks a little bit like bamboo. It's not, it's a polygonum. It can get huge, very aggressive. If Phragmites is quackgrass on steroids, this has another layer of steroids on it. It's just a monstrous plant. Grown as an ornamental years ago. It's really hard to kill. You have to do repeated applications of Roundup or something to kill it. It likes wet soils. There were a couple patches just beyond the fire station here in Ellison Bay in the Nature Conservancy land that I spotted for years, and I would mention it to people. And there's also a patch, there's an abandoned quarry on Mink River Road just outside of town here. There was some in there too. And they finally came in, I think the Door County Invasive Species team came in and took care of those. I think they must have sprayed them multiple years, and now they're gone. So they can be controlled. But this is just, it's a monster of a plant. Purple loosestrife, this was a biggie 30, 35, 40 years ago. It had taken over many wetland areas, certainly in southern Wisconsin where I was at the time. I'm not sure if it was ever a big problem up here or not, but it certainly was down there. It was almost a monoculture of loosestrife in some wetland areas. And it seemed like there was no hope. Again, another ornamental that came in. It's been illegal in Wisconsin for 25, 30 years now because of this. When I first got into plants, again, about 40 years ago, this was already on people's radar screen as a pretty serious invasive. But it's a success story. They did a lot of research, and they introduced some beetles, I think 2 different species of the same genus of beetle from Europe, where this is native. And they did a lot of research and experiments to make sure that these beetles wouldn't damage other stuff that we didn't want to damage. And it took care of the Lithrum problem in many places through biological control. So that was a real success story. And now, as I drive through southern Wisconsin, I don't see much of this. Every now and then I'll say, hey, there's one of them. It really worked. So there's a lot of hope, I think, for biocontrol for invasives. Spotted knapweed, a lot of people call this Door County heather. It's native to Asia. It's in the same family as thistle. You can kind of tell that, and dandelion. First year growth, again this rosette, then it'll grow up and flower. And sometimes it just behaves like a biennial, dies after that second year, but it'll sometimes hang on for another year or 2 or 3. Likes sunny, dry areas, is allelopathic, so it chemically keeps other plants from growing around it. And if you have a meadow, a sunny meadow, that used to be a farm field or a pasture that's kind of going back to nature, you have this. This is a bad one. Stonecrop. This is one of the ornamental sedums that you see for sale in garden stores. I first saw this as an invasive, what I felt was an invasive, down in Newport State Park on some of those rock ledges between the edge of the water and where the trees start. I said, well, this doesn't belong here. And that area is disturbed, of course, all the time by wave action. I haven't seen it anyplace else besides on that shoreline, on the Lake Michigan shoreline, so I don't think this is serious, but I thought I'd include it because I do see it whenever I walk down there. Commonly grown as an ornamental ground cover in dry, sunny areas. Valerian, this goes way back in this country, was a medicinal and herbal plant in Europe, and they brought settlers, pioneers brought it with them and grew it in their gardens. And it has escaped, and it has really made some headway in Door County. I know Gills Rock is full of it. If you go at the right time, you'll see it. It has these pinnately compound leaves, perennial, can live a long time, attractive. When I first saw this at the clearing, I thought it was Jacob's ladder, and then I realized it wasn't. So we started pulling it, which is a mistake. You can't pull it very well. It just breaks off. It's a perennial and just comes back. And then we started getting it behind the lodge, and it grew out, and we finally started to spray it. We couldn't pull it. And it was growing in places where there wasn't a lot of other stuff that we wanted to keep. There were some wildflowers, but we decided to sacrifice those because this was just marching down the slope very aggressively every year. So we sprayed it, and we pretty much have it on the run now. But once it's established, it's a bugger. Wild parsnip. This is one that we're seeing more and more. I see it further south in the county and beyond in ditches. It seems to like ditches where it's a little wet. It's related to carrot, to Queen Anne's lace. Yellow, these large yellow. I know this is called an umbel. This cluster of flowers is botanically an umbel. But it's got these big showy yellow flowers. It's a problem because of this. It's not like poison ivy that the chemical immediately reacts with your skin and gives you that rash. I think it's called phytophototoxicity. You get the oil on your skin, and then you have to have sunlight on it for it to work. And then you get these serious these are probably second-degree burns, at least here. My daughter got it once when she was in school in Madison. She worked one summer on some prairie restoration projects, and she got into it. And she had scars on her arms for 2 or 3 years after that. I guess it's very painful and very unsightly, obviously. So this is one you want to, and people like county road crews, maybe they're wearing shorts that day and they're in there with their mower and the stuff's just flying all over. They can get it all over themselves. So it's a nasty one.